Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Marcos, and I was born in Venezuela. And many of you might be wondering what is Venezuela, what type of country it is, where it is located. And it is a Latin American country, one can say, because it's part of the Spanish-speaking countries in the American continent. My contact in regards to religion with my family was, occasionally going on Sundays. If someone passed away, we would go to the funeral. That includes the church ceremony. If someone married, we would go. But other than that, we were not that I was not in a religious environment, to be honest. And yes, I had a traditional family, meaning that we would do the traditional things, but we were not really practicing, actually. And that became more apparent when I was a teenager, actually. As a teenager, I was very curious about, especially things like, what is the objective of everything? Is there something morally speaking objective? I mean, is there something that we can call good instead of making everything relative, like they do nowadays? So I was very curious about knowing what is good in all circumstances, an objective truth. And if there is an objective truth, then we should follow it, right? So I had those types of questions, and of course, I had some problems with the Christian theology and beliefs, especially about the Trinity. Like going and saying that that God is made up of three, and then somehow those three are one. But in the Bible, we see many instances where Jesus says that the Father has sent me, and he prays to the Father, and he says the Father is greater than I, and many of these instances made me had doubts about the Christian theology, and I had this belief that that Jesus Christ, alayhi salam, was not described correctly. I mean, in my eyes, he was a servant, right? He was not a God. So, and I brought these questions to the priest a couple of times, but the answers were not successful. And so in my teenage years, since I was like 15 and 14, 16, I read some books about, the Jehovah's Witnesses, which is another branch in Christianity, the Protestants, which is another branch. Even I got to read something about Hinduism and Buddhism, actually, a couple of times. Buddhism more even. And I bought books, and I wanted to find answers, right? And that was a subject that really got my attention. And Islam, now that we're talking about it, in my mind, before I get to know what it was something like very foreign, right? It's very foreign because we don't have contact with Muslims. And the first thing that came to my mind, and this was probably put there by Christians, is that it was some sort of religion of the desert about a moon god. I don't know where that came from. Actually, I think it came from Protestants, because they describe Muslims as moon worshippers. And maybe they do. Maybe they say it out of ignorance, of course, and because Muslims tend to take that moon crescent, and so maybe they did that to try to attack the religion. And so that's all I knew. Desert religion, moon god. That's it. That's all I knew, until I was 16 years old. And I was 16 years old. I was almost getting out of high school. In high school, it's a public school. We were 16, 17 years old. Public school means that we're not taught any religion subjects at class, and we don't have any religious education. There are some private schools in Venezuela and Colombia that teach Catholic schools, but I was not in one of those. And I was looking for lectures, right? So I didn't identify myself with the main beliefs of Christianity, but nevertheless, I didn't separate myself completely from that. And I remember I was looking for lectures, from some preacher, some lecture, because I was feeling down, let's say. And upon searching, it happened on YouTube. And someone, alhamdulillah, had put a video in YouTube that I watched, and it appeared in my related section on the right side, and it had a title, and that title said something like, "The truth about Jesus, alayhi salam, the true nature, the truth about him." And I clicked on it. I was curious, so I clicked on it, and I was listening. Right, it was not a preacher. Actually, by that moment, I was 16. I thought it was someone like singing. I thought it was someone singing and saying some poem in a foreign language with some melody, and it had subtitles in English, and I was able to read what it said. So that's what caught my attention, because they were explaining, and if I'm not mistaken, it was some sort of fragment of Surah Maryam. Right? I came to know this later on, but what caught my attention on that video was that they were speaking about Jesus, alayhi salam, in a way that made sense, right? They were not saying that he's a god. They were basically refuting in those fragments. I mean, in that moment, I thought, who is saying this, right? What is this? What is being said? Because he was talking about Jesus not being in a Trinity, Jesus not being a God, Jesus being a prophet of God. And I said, of course, this makes sense. This is the correct view that I was thinking before, but this is in a book, I guess, and is part of a belief somewhere. So I read this. I saw this. It caught my attention. Then I looked on Google. That was the only source I could, find something, because there's no mosque in my city. So I would go on Google, and I came to know that it was about a religion. Of course, it was Islam, and what I heard was actually someone reciting the Quran, right? So I said, okay, there's a religion called Islam. It's not about a moon god, and it's not about the desert, and it's shared by many people, and many beliefs in Islam are similar to Christianity. So there's similarities, like in the fact that we share many prophets, and to me, I said, at that first encounter, I said, this looks like a proper monotheism. Because in Christianity they would say we are a monotheistic religion, but you would see the Trinity going on, and especially in the Catholic Church, you have figures that are worshipped by people. They have saints. So the Pope will name a saint every year, whatever, someone, and that they will put statues on church. So if you go to any Catholic church, you will see that in each side of the corridor, they will have many statues with saints, and people will kneel to them and this sort of thing. So I said, what kind of monotheism is this, right? But Islam seemed to be like a pure monotheism. So I was curious about it, and I had nothing but internet to find out at the beginning. So, but alhamdulillah, there people publish many things, and there's many lectures in YouTube, especially in English language, and I would go little by little. Then I remember I went to a library, and I found a copy, like a translation of the Quran, and I bought it. It was a translation into Spanish, and I bought it, and I started to read. I remember my dad didn't like it. He said, this is the book of the terrorist. You shouldn't be reading this. My mom was indifferent. Of course, she was concerned, but she didn't. My father was more angry. So I started to read, and then I went into university. I started a program in journalism, and any normal university, you are exposed to many things, of course, and I still went into reading once in a while. I mean, I would say that my relationship with the religion after that moment was, I would read for a couple of months, and I would be into it, and then I would be afraid, and I would step back, and I would do this continuously for a couple of years. I would study, and I would read this, and this is really nice, and I would step back because I would think, but how am I supposed to practice this here? Who am I going to talk to? Because there's no mosque here, there's no Muslims. Who am I going to talk to? Who am I going to ask questions? Who are the, I mean, in this religion, people are not supposed to drink. Who is going to share these things with me? How am I going to make friends? But that's what kept me afraid, right? Because it was a big change. Because particularly for me, belief shapes your whole life. It's not something that you come and say and then you don't act upon it. So I had this relationship with the religion for a couple of years. And when I was 20, I had the chance to go to a different city and for visiting, right? And it's a city in the northwest of the country called Maracaibo. And Maracaibo has migrants from Lebanon mostly. And there's a mosque there. So I remember I was in the bus going into the city and I saw a minaret. And I already read about Islam, so I said, oh, that's a mosque. It had a dome, it had a minaret. And I said, I will go there. And I waited for Friday because I knew there was a Friday prayer. And I went there to see the Muslims, right? To interact, to see how it was. And, I saw there were mainly Lebanese because the khutbah was made only in Arabic. And there would be a man in the corner trying to translate for a group of people. So I went into that corner and I saw them pray afterwards. And I talked to them, and my questions were mainly questions about, how do you live, how people react to their religion, and is it really making things difficult or not? It doesn't make sense. You either are in the true path or you are in some different one, but not all paths can lead to the same direction. And I had to struggle with that. So that's why that was my main concern. How am I going to adapt a different lifestyle in a place where this is nowhere to be found? So I had this struggle for the next couple of years. So during this period of me going near and going far, in generally speaking, of course, I was interested in the moral aspects, in the in the religions aspects and the theology, the idea of a true monotheism. It was clear. The beliefs about the prophets, the prophets were clear. Everything made sense, let's say. But I still struggle, right? Because it's really different. It's a really different lifestyle than in the one that I'm living in. And that held me back, let's say. And that I was not fully convinced. So that's why I was still like in and out. And when I was 22, by the way, I'm 29 now. That was 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago. I was still in Venezuela. And I remember I was reading one night. I had one of these periods where I was really interested. And I was reading some articles that night. And I remember I stumbled upon one that was talking about, the scientific miracles of the Quran, the embryo and this and that. And I came upon one part of it that was really interesting. And it was speaking about the seas, the bodies of water. Big ones like sea, and that fresh water like the rivers. And it was explaining this part of the Quran when it talks about two bodies of seawater that they are together, but there's a barrier between them that doesn't let them mix, right? And at first I became surprised about this because, of course, I mean, you need to understand the context where this is being delivered in Mecca at that time, more than 1,000 years ago. How specific you have to be to say that two bodies of water do not mix. And of course we're talking about properties, density of different properties, chemical properties about water and etc. And I was surprised how this came to be, how is that this information came. So that was the preamble. Now, I came to the other section where it talked about another type of interaction between seawater and rivers. And it said that there's a barrier, of course, that doesn't allow them to intertwine, and they're also a a space in between. So there's a space in between them, not just a barrier. And if you go and read about those places, and they are, because I've been to them, in Spanish we call them estuarios. I don't know in English, I don't remember. But it's this basically this area where the river and the sea meet. This area in specific has some properties that this place is neither neither sea water, neither river water. So it's a special place in between them. And I became surprised. I said, but how specific it is, how they're describing this in detail. So I said, this has to have a different origin, right? It cannot be from an ordinary man. At that moment, I felt that I couldn't come up with an argument now to say that this is some sort of someone invented this out of their mind, of their imagination. There's something that links them to something that I can feel or I can see. In other words, I became convinced, right? I said, this is from another place. This is not an ordinary person saying something. This has a different origin. And at that moment, I could say I believed, right? Now I believed. So I had decided that I was going to act upon it regardless of the circumstances. And I remember that one day later, or maybe 2 days later, there's no mosque in my hometown. So I didn't want it to wait, right? I didn't want it to wait to meet a mosque and go in front of Muslims. So I decided to go to one of my favorite places are the mountains. The mountains tend to be calm, peaceful, silent, and we had a lot of mountains over there in my hometown. So I went to a mountain, I remember, on September 18, 2015, in Venezuela I was. And I went to this mountain, and I already knew how to do the prayer, how to do the basics. And so I went to this mountain, and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. Whatever happens here forward, if I fail, it's okay. At least I tried. And I went, and I went to a place that I really liked with a nice view of the mountains and the valleys and this. And I just lifted my finger and made the testimony of faith, and that's it. So I said, okay, I don't have any Muslim witnesses here, but I have the biggest witness of all, and I have nothing to lose. And so I made the testimony of faith, and it was the best thing that I could have ever done. And now I had a road to follow, and something to live for, and to die for, and to stand for. And that was that's how I became a Muslim at the end. I was 22 years old, and September 2015, and it's been the best decision I've ever took. And now 7 years later on, things have become easier. You just have to have the right intention, and you have to follow what's truth, and don't be afraid about anything else. If you don't have friends, if the society is different, don't worry. It's just go forward, because at the end, the truth you're following is bigger than all of them together. They don't have any power at all. And if they make it impossible and you end up failing, I mean, the truth was in front of you and you followed it, and that's pretty much all you have to do.